Welcome to the Waiting Room Revolution. We're so excited to announce our book, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest 7 Keys for Navigating a Life-Changing Diagnosis, is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Get a copy wherever you buy your books, and check out our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, for more information.
Finding Well Spouse saved my life. It did. It gave me, I think most importantly, it gave me the community, but it also gave me a language to talk about the experience I was having that I didn't have access to prior to finding it.
That was Laurel Wittman, president of the Well Spouse Association. Laurel focuses on support for younger well spouses, as her husband, Eduardo, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when he was 24 years old. In this episode, we focus on caregiving, especially long-term caregiving, what that journey has been like, and what saved her life. Hi, I'm Xian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk to people who have information and tips on how to unlock a better illness experience.
The Waiting Room Revolution starts right now. Laurel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So you're the president of a peer caregiver support organization called Well Spouse. But before we get into all of that, tell us more about yourself. Like, who is Laurel Wittman?
Well, it's a terrific question, and I'm glad you ask it because sometimes the caregiving role can feel so all-consuming. So I'm in my early 40s. I'm a wife. I'm a full-time worker outside of my Well Spouse role. I like to putter around in my garden when I have free time. I watch too much binging, too much TV. I drink too much Diet Coke. And it's a lot of trying to hold things together, right? I think all of us are doing, especially in the wake of, difficult few years.
So how did this idea of the caregiver, if I can call you that, a caregiver journey, how did that start? It started with your husband, right?
It did. That's right. Yes. My husband is, his name is Eddie. He's about 49 years old now. He was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS when he was about 23, and we met when he was 28. So he had already gotten the diagnosis and had been through, some of that difficult time of what's going on and something's not right, and was very young and trying to get established. And we met when he was still working full time, when you couldn't tell he had MS unless he got very tired, or he had a couple of drinks and then he might stumble a little bit more. So when we met, on my third date with him, I think he told me, I've got to tell you something. We were watching West Wing, actually, and it was the president on West Wing, if you remember. He had an MS diagnosis and he was like, well, I've got to tell you, I do too. I have MS. And
Wow.
My answer in that moment was, well, that's fine. We'll figure it out. In hindsight, so the entire time I've known him, he's had it. I've known he has it, and it's colored the entirety of our marriage. And it's been, almost 23 years now.
Wow.
And it must have been so hard for him to tell you.
To tell me, yeah.
Coming out of the closet with a progressive illness.
Yeah, no, and that I think is really common with people who have this condition, especially in a lot of these conditions when they're young. And it can be very scary to disclose that. And, he didn't have a sense yet for what was coming, but, he had more of a sense than I did. You just don't know what it's going to be like. And yeah, it's a tough moment.
Do you think he told you on the third date because he didn't want to get to know you and fall deeper in love with you if you were going to be scared away?
I would like to think so. Yeah, the moment was certainly right, with the TV show presenting like that perfect teachable moment kind of scenario. But yeah, that's probably right. He's a pretty forthright person anyway. I think I am too. And there's probably a sense he would have been hiding something important the longer it went. So I'm glad he told me. It definitely was tough in those early months, though. I didn't, I had a couple of friends say, you don't have to do this, like as things were progressing. And he did start accumulating some disability, a little bit more quickly than, and in hindsight, actually, there were some symptoms like cognitive symptoms that we didn't realize were cognitive symptoms, and so it led to some frustration, right, in our relationship. And a couple of friends were like, you don't have to keep going with this. But I'm glad. I'm glad for a number of reasons. This made me a very different person being on this journey with him and on my own journey. But I like who I am now.
You said that he had it for a few years before you met him. And you also said that he wasn't completely clear about how things would unfold. Is that because his style is one where he doesn't really look too far into the future? He's not a super seeker or future gazer. He sort of lives in the moment.
Yeah, he's got this, I don't know how to describe it. There's a stoic thing without being intentionally stoic. He wouldn't describe it as that, but that's how it reads to me, that, yeah, I'm the emotional one, and I would have been, looking out too far ahead and and panicking, in the moment. And he's just, he says this a lot even now, c'est la vie. This is life.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? It's not, I may not like where I am. I might not like what's happening, but c'est la vie. You can't be changed. So we'll just go along with it. And that's really, I admire it. I don't understand it at all.
It is what it is. And
it is what it is.
His approach to a certain degree probably keeps you buoyed up because, of the unintentional stoicism. But so did you go searching when you found out?
Yes.
Yeah. And do a deep dive into it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. For years and years. And, it's funny when I do these podcasts, sometimes people say, what advice do you have? And that's one of the pieces of advice I like to share is try to resist the urge to fix the problem. Try to get to a place of acceptance earlier than I did. That fixing stage, I think, is everyone goes through it. It's so common. There's this feeling that this just isn't happening to me and I'm different somehow. And, we just haven't figured out how to fix it. And it's avoidance, right? It's a form of avoidance, of accepting where you really are. And I can see now with hindsight, like I give that advice and I know I couldn't have taken it, even though I wish I had, So yeah, there was years and years of research that somehow I would come up with the thing that, all the neurologists in the world and all the, I haven't figured out yet.
It's a coping mechanism and it makes you feel less helpless.
Right. It's a control thing. Totally. Yeah.
I'm curious, at what point did you feel like you used the label of caregiver?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. It was really far into the journey. And that's another thing I like to talk about now is that a lot of well spouses, which is the word we use, which incorporates both people who feel they're caregiving and people who maybe aren't feeling that they're caregiving, don't identify that way. A lot of people just don't realize that they have started on a journey, very early on. It really, from the get-go, it started. My husband's cognitive issues, for instance, led to trouble paying bills. He couldn't, sit down and focus. And so I stepped in very early on to do that. I cleaned up his credit score, and it wasn't, he had the money, he was working, it was fine. He just couldn't, that step, the executive function piece, was just really tough for him. And that's one of those early caregiving steps that you don't recognize as such. I think a lot of us think of the doctor's appointments or changing somebody or, providing more medically oriented care. But you start taking those steps. And I think it's especially pronounced with spousal caregivers because so much of our roles are aligned anyway. So it doesn't really feel like I'm stepping in for Eddie. It feels like, well, one of the two of us has to pay these bills. So it's going to be me. So I think spousal caregivers probably feel even less like caregivers because they just feel like this is just what you do. It's part of the role.
It's more blurred.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've been married for 23 years. It's a long time that you've been caring. Like, I'm kind of curious, how has the experience been like over time? I mean, that's kind of a big question, but were there highs, were there lows, were there different parts? Like, how would you describe the different milestones or the different chapters of that?
Yeah, I do think that period of trying to fix things was one era of the journey. There was an era in the middle where I was utterly drowning, which I think is when I would say I felt most like a caregiver or started to feel that transition. And I felt unmoored was the word I kept using. Like, all of the things I thought were true in my life were suddenly not true. Like, does it make sense to continue throwing myself into my work if I'm going to have to impoverish myself to get the care my husband needs? And, so a lot of these questions, big life questions, started kind of falling in on us, falling in on me. And he has, mood changes are not unknown with MS and a lot of neurological diseases as well. And so it was the collision of kind of those two things, that his needs were increasing, his mood was changing, and, I was kind of losing track of who I was. Those were very difficult years. And that is when I found Well Spouse. That's when I started reaching out to get help. And I wish it had happened earlier, but that's when it happened. And then the last few years, I think we've gotten to a place where I feel like I'm at acceptance most days, that I have a different marriage than I expected to have, but I'm not fighting that. And there is a lot of joy in it. It's, the whole thing, though, is the most difficult thing I've ever done. The whole start to finish. It has made me a different person. But it's only probably in the last 4 or 5 years that I feel okay about that, I guess.
Because how many years has it been?
Yeah. So, I mean, he basically started declining right after we started dating. So by the time we were married, he had gone from, which was only 3 years, he had gone from walking to being in a wheelchair full time. And he's needed 24-hour care for 13 years now. And he really needs 24-hour care with, access to, people who can hear monitors at this point.
Yeah.
So it's intense. It's very intense caregiving.
So if you look over the pattern of his illness, because you have described the sort of the different chapters that you went through as a caregiver, wife, a well spouse.
Yeah.
Can you describe, the chapters of MS?
Yeah. So for him, he had the most common diagnosis of MS, which is relapsing remitting. It's what I think 90% of people start with. And then most people do transition to secondary progressive MS, which is characterized by fewer ups and downs and just a steady progression. And he got there very quickly. He was diagnosed before some of the better meds are out. So his progression was, I think, it was probably a little more rapid. It often is for men, a little more rapid than the average MS patient. But he was fine, and there would be ups and downs, and he'd take steroids and kind of bounce back. And then he didn't bounce back to 100%. He bounced back to 90 and then 80. And then at some point, it was just this kind of consistent slide where you don't have the ups and downs. And then in recent years, and this is typical in late stage MS, he's very prone to infections related to the disease itself. And so the MS actually, has kind of done all the damage it's probably going to do at this point. It's this constant infection cycle that we fight with. And early on, he had some cognitive challenges as part of the disease, and they're more prominent now. So, but I think they've also made, maybe that plus the lack of energy has made, the mood changes take a lot of energy, and he doesn't have that energy now. So he's a softer person than he started in some ways.
We have not had someone on our podcast who can speak to this illness, MS, actually. So I think it's going to be very interesting for the listeners when you describe what it's like to have MS, the different chapters, and to care for someone with MS. So what I'm hearing is, your husband, Eddie, has the relaxing. No, not relaxing.
The opposite.
Nothing's relaxing.
Relapsing.
Relapsing and remitting, where it was quite a yo-yo for a while when he was having, let's just say, an exacerbation. He would be treated with steroids to try to get it under control. And you would hope that he would return to his baseline and get through the relapse. And then at some point, the steroids weren't doing the same. You didn't get as big bang for your buck, and it was less of a yo-yo and just started to look downward. And that's when you knew he was in the secondary progressive form, and now you're calling it advanced, or did you say
late stage advanced? Yeah,
late stage advanced.
You can use all those words. Yeah.
So is that scary for you? And do you know
terrifying? Yeah. It's it's immensely terrifying. And every time he goes into the hospital with an infection now, we have, every time he ends up in the ICU, we have quality of life discussions, and we try and call in resources that can help us with that. And, trying to walk that line between his wishes and what's realistic and practical for somebody who's at such an advanced state of disease, and, I'm cognizant of the limitations of medical technology, even though I don't like the limitations, So we have a lot of very difficult discussions, even for kind of average infections.
Because it's interesting what you said. The MS has done its damage. It's taken away his mobility and his strength, and he's now bedridden. Did you say? Bedridden.
Yep.
And so the MS and their cognitive decline as well.
Right.
So physical and cognitive functional decline. But what's going to eventually throw a hook in the storyline is infection, because anyone who is bedridden is susceptible, whether you're bedridden with Parkinson's or bedridden with ALS, you sort of converge and all become part of a similar bedridden at-risk patient population. Yep.
Yeah. In fact, nowadays when he goes to the hospital, doctors will often ask before they look at the record, does he have ALS? It looks, his presentation now is more typical of that kind of disease than, what MS patients look like now.
So given all the changes that are happening over time, what does advanced care planning look like?
So about 6 years ago, we had the really terrible discussions of, what do you want your life to look like if X or Y happens? And, he already had advanced MS at that time. And so he was making some of those decisions, all those decisions, with the knowledge of what the likely event, would be that he'd be having to deal with. And, we're still acting in reliance on those documents. And, we're still trying to navigate and make sure that his current wishes, align with what he wants. But it's tough. And I think a lot of doctors, and I know I'm cognizant that you're both in the medical profession, but it is very tough for me to feel like I'm sometimes advocating for, his quality of life looks one way from the outside. And I'm aware I can be too close to it to be impartial, but I really am very sensitive to what his quality of life is, as much as I can be.
So how do you measure your own quality of life, and where does that fit into his documents and decision making? And
it's a great question. I said earlier that being in a bit of a place of acceptance, I do feel joy in a way I didn't for a number of years there in the middle. I do feel in some ways I'm along for the ride because of his wishes, as I've shared. They're not necessarily the decisions I would make, but I think these are the decisions he wants. And so, we will keep fighting infections and having hospital stays until it doesn't make sense. But I do, let me say it this way. I think I'm probably in the best case scenario for spousal caregiving. I'm still able to work. I have financial resources for care to help me. I have aid coverage at the moment, so I can travel sometimes. I have tremendous family support. I don't say all of this to brag to other caregivers, but I say it's still the hardest thing I've ever done. And finding joy has sometimes felt elusive. And that's the best case scenario. I have all of these resources around me. And so it is really tough to hold on to pieces of yourself. But I am able to find joy in my own life, around these hospital stays.
I don't think it's bragging. I actually think that you are sharing the ingredients to keep yourself buoyed up.
It's just it can be really tough for other people to find them. Like I am very much dependent on my employer and my family, and the ability to find care, my location. It all plays into, and I'm fortunate that I'm at a crossroads of all of those things that make this life possible.
People say that we shy away from talking about intimacy when it comes to progressive illness. For Well Spouse, do you guys discuss that? Is that something that's an elephant in the room, or does it come out as discussion?
No, we do discuss it. I think it is the thing that brings people in, and it breaks my heart how shamed people feel about expressing these needs within their marriage, and they can't. And there's a whole variety of reasons, right? It's not just, taking this step back early on when I was still, having an intimate relationship with my husband, the MS Society's handouts were, just find new ways of doing it. But they didn't talk at all about the fact that you might very well be different people. Like somebody who's having cognitive issues doesn't really feel like the person you started with in a lot of ways. So you could have, you know, at some extreme, you've got, you know, somebody who has dementias or Alzheimer's, you know, they are totally a different person. And there isn't an easy way to overcome that. And then you add in, you know, some conditions have hypersexuality as a symptom of disease. And, you know, there's no way you want to have an intimate relationship with your partner when they're exhibiting those behaviors. We don't shy away from it. It's absolutely something that, you know, I want people to bring to our organization, because it's really, that is the one thing that distinguishes spousal caregiving from other relationships, is the loss of that intimate relationship in many cases.
Oh, that's a perfect segue, Laurel. You mentioned the organization you lead, WellSpouse. Please tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So WellSpouse is a 35-year-old nonprofit. We focus entirely on the partners, the spouses of people who are living with chronic illness or disability. We are disease agnostic. We are stage agnostic. And what I mean about both of those things is, you know, you can come with any disease that is impacting your relationship or impacting you personally. That might be mental illness. It can be cancer. Neurodegenerative disease is our largest category. And it's the memory disorders and cancer and cardiovascular disease kind of from there. You know, we're seeing patients with long COVID, or patients whose partners have long COVID, start to join us. So we're disease agnostic, we're stage agnostic. We have people who are still, you know, very much in the diagnosis stage of their illness. Maybe they have an unusual presentation and it doesn't line up with any diseases that we know now, all the way to people who are, you know, years and years into a disease process. And we have a number of people whose partners, you know, maybe were in an accident of some kind, or a robbery victim in one, you know, in one case. So however you find yourself, you know, in need of this kind of support, we want to be there for it. And our model is one of peer support. So we aren't run by professionals. We have a small staff. It's otherwise run by volunteers, but it's people who are in the trenches as caregivers or well spouses, you know, providing comfort and resources and guidance to other caregivers in that same situation.
And so if I'm understanding right, the most of the supports that you offer, when you say peer supports, it is mostly I guess information. It's having someone who has walked that journey with you, or is walking that journey, the same journey, who can help you navigate this process. Is that right? It's not really offering specific home care services or anything like that. It's
right. No, that's right. Yep. It's and I like to think, you know, we at least, you know, we're primarily US focused, although we have a number of Canadian members as well. But with 50 states and 50 different systems, we're too small to provide, you know, those kind of direct hands-on resources. Instead, it's, you know, how can we help you on this journey? You know, this will sound cheesy, but to live your best life. This is probably going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, but how can we take some of that burden off and build a community around you that can support you? And that's one of the ways I think we are a little different than other organizations. You know, there are a lot of support groups out there, but we have support groups that have run for years and years on end. You know, my needs are different than they were 5 years ago, but I still wanted that continuity. I didn't want a 6-week program, you know, that might run again next year. Like I need 24-hour support and I need different support at different times.
Yeah. So what you really are talking about is building a community.
That's right.
It's a community there. And how has that community, you sort of alluded to it, but how did finding that community change? In what ways did it support you? What ways did it change the experience?
Yeah, so we hear this a lot, and I will echo it, that finding WellSpouse saved my life. It did. It gave me, I think most importantly, it gave me the community, but it also gave me a language to talk about the experience I was having that I didn't have access to prior to finding it. And so what I mean by that is, you know, in those kind of middle years, so we talked about that middle phase, really, I was just a ball of anxiety, and I didn't realize I was really feeling grief and losses. And, you know, I was having trauma. I was facing trauma from this experience of, you know, frankly, a relationship that in any other context you might consider abusive, but he needed care and I had to provide it. Somebody had to provide it. You know, and so it gave me all these other words to put to the experience. And even as we said, you know, naming myself as a caregiver, that was a big step. You know, I was, 35 years old. Nobody feels like they're going to be in that role, you know, at that age. And so putting these words around the experience I was having was really powerful. I think just talking about it, right? It's not something that comes up in casual conversation, and we often, you know, we wear masks, a lot of us as caregivers. You know, we talk about in our meetings a lot about this, that the how are you question is so tough for us to answer. You know, like, do you want the real story, or do you want to just hear that things are generally okay? You know, and so having a place to go where we could say, you know, things are really not okay, and have people understand was absolutely invaluable.
There's an invitation to be genuine and just authentically you, and you don't have to protect other people from the answer to how are you, which is I'm not great, and then they run away. So you know
exactly.
That the people at Well Spouse will stay there while you explain really how are you. They're not going to run away. They're going to lean in instead of leaning out.
I loved how you talked about the community and the language. And in many ways, that's the link to the waiting room revolution. And I know that you followed us on our podcast early on. And as you know, we have a book that's coming out that's out. This will be aired then. So this, you know, as you know, we have a book that's out now, trying to give people the language and through these 7 keys of, you know, walking 2 roads and zooming out. So I'd love to hear your reactions of when you heard about the Waiting Revolution, the podcast, and what we're trying to do with the movement. How did that connect with your work at Well Spouse?
Yeah, no, what jumped out to me was hearing you all say that you've heard over and over through your research over the years that people say, why didn't anyone tell me about this? And that's, you know, it's like what I said earlier about the intimacy piece, that people come to with such shame to this situation. You know, we hear a lot about people who feel guilty about the feelings they're having, and I'm like, they're just feelings. You got to kind of work through them, right? It's when you don't work through them that they interfere with your life in a big ways. So yeah, I think that's one of the pieces that Well Spouse, you know, where it dovetails nicely with what you all are doing. It's to help people figure out things earlier on and put words to the experience they're having. I think that's so important. You know, it resonates, of course, too, just knowing what's coming. And that's another place, because we are stage agnostic. You can kind of see people do survive this, you know, and in fact, we have, you know, part of our community is made up of what they call formers. And those are people who have lost their spouse. Generally, their spouse will have passed. And we want them to stay in our community too, both because they're not done processing this experience they've had, but because they show us the next steps that are coming and can give us hope along the way. So,
you know, unlike some of the other progressive life-limiting illnesses that have an average life expectancy of, I don't know, anywhere from 2 years to 20 years, the MS journey can be quite long.
Very long.
And that makes the caregiver journey very long as well. And, you know, when I have had to read up on MS, I think what I read was that it might shorten a person's life by 6 to 9 years.
7 years.
But it doesn't, but I mean, that's very different than some of the other illnesses. Like ALS will shorten your life in a much bigger way. But I was back to what I was going to say before, you know, I think I actually have only cared for one person with MS in the 19 years of home-based palliative care. I mean, I think part of it is because we just don't identify these people as we are able to identify people declining from cancer, or the illness trajectory is so long and shallow that you can't pick up when, oh, we need someone now. So it's like the colors of a rainbow. We just go from one color to a next with no real signal. You know, so why do you think that I don't see people with MS? Where are they?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right about that. First, hopefully the better drugs nowadays mean you will see fewer of them. But even in Eddie's journey, right, which is at probably a more extreme end of the MS progression and stories, in that he was diagnosed very young and accumulated disability fairly quickly. We didn't involve palliative care until probably 4 or 5 years ago. And then I think it was really because we wanted access to medical marijuana, which had just opened up in our state. That was the only reason. Yeah. I'm a huge proponent of bringing in those resources earlier. It seems there's a supply constraint, I think. There just aren't enough providers to help with that. And, I think you've said before, I've seen you say that, every doctor needs to be trained in this, right? There really shouldn't be a specialty. It should be just something that is care provided along the way, but we're not there yet, I think. And then I think there's a lot of confusion around, palliative care and hospice. People think that they are interchangeable and, they're very different. But when I describe palliative care, to our members or to people who are looking for guidance, I think of it in terms of, when you have symptoms in the context of illness that are disruptive to your life, palliative care people are the people who can help you figure that out. And it doesn't cost much to involve them early on. And if you don't need them right away, they're there and you know what they do offer. So I'm a big proponent, and much earlier than certainly we found it.
Do you ever think about your life after?
I do. Yeah. It's having been in emergency situations with him a number of times, it's hard not to reflect a little bit about what that looks like. And I have seen other caregivers going through it, the average age of the spousal caregiver is going to typically be older. That's one of the reasons I did get involved with WellSpouse, was a selfish interest in finding people similar in age to me. That's right. And to bring them into the organization. And I don't know that how I will react will look different in probably my 40s to somebody who's in their 60s or 70s. So I think about that as well.
Yeah. Some caregivers have shared with me how guilty they feel that that their mind wanders into afterwards. And sometimes they feel even more guilty when they think about that it will bring some relief.
Yeah. No, we try and normalize that in our community, that it is really okay to feel relief afterwards. It's okay to think about afterwards. It's okay to wish it were over, even though, for these progressive diseases, there's only one way it's over, right? And those are very difficult ideas to sit with if you're doing it alone in kind of the society we have nowadays. But I think if you can start talking about that and raising it, saying it out loud, saying it first to yourself and then saying it out loud, that's how you, I think, get some comfort and peace with it, really.
What you're really doing at WellSpouse is so important, because the system really focuses on the patient, but not so much on the family and the carers, who do 95% of the work outside of the hospital. And it's the informal caregivers who need support too. And we at Waiting Room Revolution are trying to provide more information to caregivers and earlier.
Yeah, I have to think anything that provides more of a roadmap than most people have is helpful. I mean, that's, in fact, there's research that I was looking at recently that says that about spousal caregivers in particular. They want more information on the tangible resources, caregiving, respites, et cetera. They want more emotional support, which is really a piece that we are stepping in to provide. And they want more financial support, which who knows? I don't, I would love to say that's going to be a problem that's fixed, but at least in the US, probably not, not for a while anyway. So yeah, anything that provides more guidance, because right now, the patient themselves, if they're fortunate to have a partner that is, participating in helping with their care or other supports, they are the ones who have to knit together this whole life. Doctors are overworked. You get, 10 minutes at best. Even your primary care provider is going to struggle to put the pieces together for you. Now, at least in the US, you probably are familiar with this idea that patients can access their notes immediately, which is great. Medical notes on Epic and the other various software systems. That's terrific. More information is always helpful, but there isn't anyone helping us figure it out, right? And so, and I know, we're driving doctors crazy because we're asking questions and you guys don't have time for that, so everyone is stretched too thin. So anything that can help, put these pieces together. When I was looking through your 7 steps, I was struck by one in particular. I have a very dear friend who has very advanced cancer, and she has absolutely put this team around her, and she's assigned each of us roles. And when I saw that step about building, your support network and your community right around you, I thought of her. And she very tangibly has, she has her chief communications person who sends out the emails to everyone. I am her chief researcher because my day job, I spend a lot of time reading research, and with Eddie's experience, I've obviously done a lot of medical stuff. She's got the person coordinating the food, so building, like finding, we all don't have these skills. It's finding your village, and putting those pieces in place is so important.
I mean, that is the ideal situation, right?
It is. And it's hard for a lot of people to find that. Even simple, if you live in a very rural community where you're far away from your neighbors, that's a very different experience than, where I can run next door and get somebody to step in if I need it.
Sure. But at least we're telling people that at some point it's helpful to we call it activate your village. And it's about connecting the dots, right? How do you, so that people know how to connect all this information and make it work. But I think to add to the things that, caregivers are looking for, I think what we are offering really is informational support, because I think what we're able to do is to share ways that, or the tips that, as sort of insiders or people who have seen this a lot, on how you can ask questions so that it will reveal the meaning making. It's not that helpful actually to have tons and tons of medical information. It's what does that mean
you have to pick
for my life? How does that what is that going to mean for my life, for the quality of myself, the patient, my partner, all of these things like that, making sense of it. And what do I do with that is the information piece that I think, I hope that we're going to try and do with our book, and maybe, we can partner with Well Spouse and do some events together.
Yeah, I think that'd be wonderful.
When I think about, what does this social movement / revolution / 7 keys, whatever we want to call it, what does it offer? I would agree, Cian, that it helps fill the gap of informational needs. And I think it also, therefore, if it's done early on, offers a sense of time and a rhythm to the illness that doesn't feel as crisis driven. But if we can offer people information, tell them how to extract it from the healthcare system, you get information, and then you weave that into proactive planning, and that affords you time. Information will also allow you to begin the grieving process, which is protective anticipatory grief. As you face multiple losses, you steady yourself and steel yourself to eventually deal with, the biggest losses. If you have real, honest information, if everyone's in la la land, then the illness feels more unsteady, reactive, crisis-driven, unmoored is what you said, and feels almost like a sudden death experience. Instead of
I was just gonna say, we're always talking about waiting for a shoe to drop, which is just not any way to live your best life. Always waiting for some catastrophe to happen.
And it offers people control. So there's nothing worse than feeling out of control, that you're neither here nor there. Limboville, and I can imagine in MS, though, because it's such a long illness, you feel like you're in a perpetual limbo. So,
and it's even, I think a lot of diseases have this this characteristic, but MS in particular is known as a snowflake disease because your disability is tied to where lesions are. And you can have one really poorly placed lesion that makes you totally paralyzed, and you can have dozens of others. My MRI looks like a Christmas tree is something people with MS will say, but they have no issues, and so it's even hard across the disease is very, very heterogeneous. So there isn't that easy map to what is my life going to look like.
So there's this average storyline that we talked about, but then there's the individual snowflakes, and you can't know exactly how your individual course, but still helpful to see the big picture and the long view. I think the major milestones. Yeah,
I agree with that.
So we've talked a lot about what caregiving and how you have been giving. as a partner to your husband, Eddie, is there anything that you would say that caregiving, that role has given to you?
Yeah, it has made me, it's made me able to sit with people in pain in a way that I never could before. I think a lot of us shy away from reaching out to people who are grieving or reaching out to people who are in difficult situations because we're afraid we'll say the wrong thing, or, we won't respond right, or is it too soon to reach out or too late, or, you talk yourself out of acting.
Mm-hmm.
And this experience has given me a lot of confidence to listen and not talk and just be with people. If somebody wants some guidance or, some of my brainstorming ideas, I'm happy to do that. But I think I'm better prepared to handle difficult situations than I ever was. It's funny. It has given me a real confidence. It also it makes me feel a little out of sync with the real world too, in a lot of ways, because a lot of people's problems sometimes can feel trivial when you're, dealing with ICU stays and the like. But I like to think the takeaway of that is I am tuned into the important things, I think, for my life and my husband's life and what we need, to live well as we can.
You know what? It's funny you say that, because first of all, I think that's so eloquent. But when I was, boo-hoo, not feeling well before taping this podcast, I had a little chills and maybe a fever. I thought to myself, you know what? Buck up. You are about to meet someone, who would be happy to be sitting in my situation with a little bit of a fever.
I say that too, even now. And when I had COVID recently, and I had to 3 weeks ago, and I had to go stay at a hotel away from my husband so that he hopefully wouldn't get it. He had just come out of an ICU with respiratory issues. So, and I was alone having 103-degree fevers in a hotel room, and it was terrifying. Right. But at the same time, it's like, when I think of all the things Eddie has gone through, like, I can do this. This I can handle. So I get strength, in knowing what he can handle, that humans are capable of amazing resiliency, even when it doesn't feel like it.
Totally. And this is why when people say, oh, you have the hardest job, I say to myself, you have no idea. Every day I get to meet people like Laurel, and you walk away just amazed, with admiration, and you reflect on your own life and could I do it, and what's important, what's not important. So there is this vicarious personal growth that happens, when you're doing this kind of
the reflective nature of what you're seeing.
I loved how you were describing before, I feel like this experience for you has made you feel less helpless, that you feel a sense of agency. And I love what you said about being able to just be present and stay the course and lean in, and you don't have to have a solution and an answer for everything, but it's better not to run away and avoid. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. I think this has been an incredible podcast, to be honest with you. We've talked about so many topics.
Your questions are great.
And I feel like you've been so honest with us. I really appreciate that, Laurel.
Yeah, thank you. I am happy to do it. And I think what you all are doing is fabulous. And I hope we can work together.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on our podcast, Laurel.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can visit our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, to learn more about our movement and how you can join it. The podcast is produced by myself, Kayla McMillan, Valerie Bishop, Shilpa Jyothi Kumar, and Maggie Sivak. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.